Am I crazy? Did I take that way too far?
Rise of the insurance industry, for example. Refused correction by the church.
But I'm going to ask you, am I a heretic?
What is luck?
Jeez, okay. Oh, wow. I am not a big fan of saying something is a social construct. I'm very nervous to say that because it's measurable. I mean, we do quite a bit of measuring of luck. It's deeply rooted in history, and you can see it just abundantly today. I mean, look at the massive size of some of these gambling organizations like DraftKings and the other sports books. And you look in the Bible and they're casting lots.
Even the apostles.
Right. So it's very hard to say that luck is a social construct. I think luck is, but there are certain forms of luck that are most definitely socially constructed. Someone being a lucky person. I think that's most likely the result of an optimist who views the things that happen to them in a positive light. You might say that that person is lucky because, well, they always feel lucky. They view everything that happens to them in a positive light. But clearly luck is related to the future. I don't think luck goes backwards in the same way. Of course, we don't travel backwards in time, so maybe there's something there that's not yet been discovered. But something about luck has to do with the unknown course of events of the future. But of course, we can prescribe luck to things of the past as well. Like when we describe a heroic battle, fundamentally, we agree that a lot of those things also come down to luck. Firing an arrow, there's luck involved because you can use physics to explain why luck's involved. When you fire an arrow off the side, because the string's not perfectly aligned with the wood, what it results in is the arrow actually going back and forth, and some people can use that amazingly to increase their accuracy. So there's some measure of luck that has to do with skill as well. Perhaps you don't have enough skill to be lucky in that same way. I don't know quite what to say luck is, because what's luck's relationship with God's plan and its relationship with foresight? If I had perfect foresight, would I not think anything is luck? I'm having trouble coming up with an answer to this question. I end up just asking more questions. So I'll try and get down to a definition of luck, and then you can tell me whether or not that's a heretical definition.
Okay.
So luck, or the measurement of luck, is the quantification of the benefit of unknown future events for the person to whom the luck is ascribed.
Definitely not heretical.
But it's very dangerous territory, I think, because not everything can be luck. There's clearly a plan for us.
I think where luck can become heretical is when, well, and also, excuse me, I would say there's a difference between being heretical and being out of line with the faith. So technically speaking, to be a heretic is to obstinately refuse correction by the church, in the profession of church teaching, and typically in a public way. So there's a very technical definition to heretic. For our purposes, more for a colloquial purpose, I would say that where you run into trouble with something like luck is when you get into the space of superstition and maybe even the neo-pagan conception of luck. So for the pagans, their concept of the future was largely determined by, I would say, their perception of fate and destiny. And you have, for example, people trying to read omens for whether or not they will be victorious in battle. You have even somebody like Saul, King Saul, the first king of the Jewish people, seeking to know what his fate would be. You have the blending of Christianity with pagan conceptions of destiny, fate. Even in some sense, the philosophical realm, you have somebody like Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy. He has this wheel of fortune. So where this becomes a very interesting theological question is, how do we as Christians conceive of the future and perceive the future and live into the future? Before I attempt an answer at that theological space, I will say that as a statistics person, I studied ACMS here at Notre Dame, did your graduate work at Purdue in stats. Of course, there are very mathematical definitions of luck, which is all good and well and interesting. Some people do seem to just have the hot hand every once in a while. Most of that boils down to law of large numbers, convergence to the mean, things like that, which of course is very interesting. And human beings have generally gotten a lot better at controlling variability for our benefit. That's basically the whole rise of the insurance industry, for example, which has brought a lot of good into the world. All right, so that's the mathematical piece. Let's go back to the theology piece. Christianity is a pretty fundamental shift from a world of fate and destiny to a world of providence and vocation. In the world of destiny, somebody is destined to do something. Julius Caesar believed that he was destined to become the emperor, destined to die on the Ides of March. You have this sense that the gods are in charge and that there's just something destined there. In Christianity, we have a sense of vocation, namely that people are called to do certain things, but they have free will in how they bring those things about and how they respond to God, which is where providence comes in. When we don't respond to God in the appropriate way, particularly through sin, we believe that God is ultimately bringing all things to a good conclusion, if not even a better conclusion for us having fallen. So providence, broadly speaking, is this hope, this belief, this faith that in some sense, regardless of human action, God will bring about the ultimate good, namely the kingdom of God, heaven, and that we have particular vocations, opportunities to respond to God and contribute something to that kingdom, contribute something, we offer something up to God through our life, through our life's work. So instead of living with superstitious beliefs, the Christian lives with confidence and assurance that the future holds something good. They have a role to play in that future. That's my initial attempt.
Okay, I definitely have some follow-up questions. This is almost an impossible question, so I'm going to try and rephrase it. But the question I want to ask is, when does God decide to intervene? But I guess a better question is, we see instances in the Bible, and as Catholics, we believe that it's not a deist God that creates and then things that happen. Because I think that really that deist notion really fits very well with the concept of luck is almost running everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think appears to be luck is frequently God's design, but I don't know that it's always in an interventional way. I don't think you could go, all right, God, I'm choosing between two things, now control this next coin flip, because creation was made in a way in which normal distributions exist. So I guess I'll put you on the spot in a little more aggressive of a way, because
Sure.
I think that could get maybe a better answer about it. Why should we believe a lot of these things that happen in the Bible when things that occur in the Bible might appear to just be highly unlikely events? Because there's dew not being on one, highly unlikely, but it's not physically impossible. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of your materialists and atheists will frequently take a viewpoint that luck almost does run everything.
I see.
So what are maybe some of the reasons that a Catholic wouldn't believe that?
I think I see the course that you're steering us towards. I would say from a Catholic perspective, there is a deep resonance between faith and reason such that as Catholic scientists, as Catholic mathematicians, for example, we can believe in a world in which there is a good deal of variance, randomness. Randomness controlled within bounds of variance that ultimately converges to homeostatic equilibriums in the biological realm and the physical realm and so on. Sometimes these are favorable, sometimes they're not. There is also not a conflict between a world that is governed by laws or, more properly speaking, something like consistent patterns of physical and even, I would say, social, psychological behaviors, realities. Notice behavior itself is a humanization of an inanimate object.
Right.
So these need not, there can be a resonance here or a harmony. And what I would say is that if God were to intervene all the time in creation, it wouldn't be miraculous. That's one thing. The second thing is that we don't exactly know how God intervenes in reality. I would suggest to you that the primary way in which God intervenes in reality is through human action, through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, through leading human beings to accept their vocation, such as Mary, Jesus working with the apostles, the Holy Spirit guiding the church. And the church, if you think about it from the perspective of the instrument by which God guides us, sort of a highway to heaven, literally, kind of in juxtaposition to the highway to hell, a highway to heaven, like the clearest and most direct way to heaven. The church is this really complex institution that has developed many, many means of coming to conclusions about discerning God's will, discerning what is true and what we should do next. And one of the main means of that is something like an ecumenical council, where you have many people giving their opinions, talking, writing lengthy articles, doing lifetimes of scholarship to contribute their part to that. So the way in which we as church navigate uncertainty in the future and live into the future is predominantly by trying to discern the will of God. Now, every once in a while there are miraculous interventions, but I would say typically miraculous interventions, the vast majority of the time, such miraculous interventions are typically beneficial for the salvation of individual souls, maybe a few. His or her life is changed by that intervention. Bernadette Subaru, Saint Bernadette, who saw Our Lady at Lourdes. 72 or so confirmed miracles from Lourdes. For the most part, those have bolstered the faith of those who believe in God. For probably a many few, that's a funny way to say it, but I would say the majority of people see something that they think is miraculous or not, see something the church would call miraculous, and based on their priors, either dismiss that miracle or accept it. And there's a very few who I think actually change. So in some sense, what I'm saying is that we have this conception, which I would argue is a misconception, that the miraculous intervention is the thing. What I want to say is that the thing is actually the church. That's a much more interesting means of discernment and so on. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that absolutely
Question?
makes sense. I think if I could try to rephrase kind of what
sure.
you're saying.
Please do.
The source of almost every single miracle on earth isn't miracles, but souls.
How so?
Well, the divine part of every human is our soul. And so all the good that we produce is as a result of God, and God is a part of us through our souls. Every person, every soul on earth is a miracle and a miracle worker because we're doing the work of God on earth.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Am I crazy? Did I take that way too far?
No, I think I see what you're saying, and I think it is an extension of what I'm saying.
Okay.
Which is something like this. The primary miracle, to use kind of a broad sense, is the work of God in salvation history to bring people to Him, gathering them as a church, as a people. And the primary miracle, so to speak, is those people who do respond to God, who live their vocation well, who grow in holiness, and some of those become saints, recognizable here on earth. And I would be with you. For me, a lifetime of integrity, a lifetime of living a vocation well, is much more powerful from an epistemological perspective than something that may be miraculous, that may be a statistical anomaly, kind of an unknown biological phenomenon that hasn't been well studied or well explored yet. So, for me, that's a much more convincing thing. The reality of the church, if you think about it from the perspective of the church being millions and millions, billions of people who have lived the faith well and handed it on, is a much more powerful miracle. That said, I spent a summer in Lourdes, 2 months in Lourdes, loved Lourdes, and I will say that there is also something beautiful about the actually miraculous. It's often not a very convincing thing in terms of bringing somebody to the faith. Sometimes it is, but there is something beautiful in that too. But if those exceptions were to become the norm, then we would, as a psychological rule, they would become boring to us.
Yes.
Even more so. I will say that one miraculous artifact that I'm more familiar with is the Shroud of Turin.
Okay.
Which the Vatican, in fact, opened up to scientists to investigate and study. Now, there's some contradictory findings there, but from the little that I've researched this, it does really seem to be an amazing artifact, and I would encourage you to draw your attention there. There's also, in the realm of Lourdes, it might be well worth your time to look into the process of miracle investigation there, too. They're very, very, very strict in what they allow and don't allow as miracles. It goes through a whole medical team, and it's pretty interesting. And there's this great article I could send you of a Nobel Prize winning, I think he was a physiologist who went to Lourdes twice and witnessed what many people believe to be miracles, but what were not confirmed by the church as miracles. This atheist physiologist came out of that. I don't think he ever converted, but certainly opened his mind a bit.
So I did have a follow-up question on luck. So when we talk about the role that God plays on earth being primarily through the church and through her members and even people who aren't members of the church doing God's work on earth, it almost points me in a direction of there is no luck, but rather what we create. So I think about it this way, right? Is God likely to divinely intervene in the Super Bowl? It seems highly unlikely to me. I don't know how much the outcome of the game means to God. But the game certainly means quite a bit to God because it can be used to glorify. It's somebody's vocation. It's a game, and games have a long tradition in humanity and in the church. But I think of it almost like there is no luck. There's the preparation that everyone's put into it. There's things that go wrong. There's unintended consequences. But I don't know about a physical reality of luck. I certainly think that luck is measurable, but luck as perceived by humans is measurable. Like what changes when you're creating sports books odds is the bet that a person is making. Like, I think that this odd is worse than the odds that I would have made myself, so I'm placing a bet on it. But that's merely betting and quantization of individuals' beliefs of the future. So perhaps that's what luck is, and it is purely human perception, but I don't know if you would go that far.
I don't know enough about the physics to say, for example, whether or not with complete accuracy, say, for example, a die, if you knew every single relevant variable with enough degree of accuracy, whether you could always tell which 6 is going to be up or the 4 or whatever. It does seem to be the case from my layman's understanding of the deepest level of physics that there's an element of randomness involved. Certainly from my perspective in math, one of my favorite things to study actually is randomness, chaos. Now, chaos is interesting from a technical perspective insofar as it's a deterministic system. What it means to be chaotic is that a very, 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 very small change in the starting conditions leads to a drastic change in the outcome as time plays itself out in the system. But essentially, I guess what I would say is that whether or not God chose to create a world in which there is variance, where there is probability involved, it seems to me that that's true.
I'm going to try and summarize what you're saying there, and hopefully you'll agree with it.
Yeah.
Randomness is a fundamental underpinning of the world, and it's investigable in mathematics, physics. Randomness clearly exists. But the human condition is to vastly over-exaggerate the influence that this randomness has on our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and I think I would also add that for my brief definition of luck, I think it's a psychological phenomenon that is primarily a tool of perception and motivation, and maybe also be an epiphenomenon of deeper feelings. Those who are optimistic will probably tend to think luck's on their side. Those who are pessimistic, it will probably be reflective of the feeling that they don't have a lot of luck. Gambling places are really good at manipulating this kind of perception. So yeah, I would agree broadly that I think luck is predominantly a psychological phenomenon. To tie it all back to casting lots for the 12th apostle, for example, I think essentially what that is an example of is people being unwilling or unable to imagine a scenario in which they take responsibility for discerning who's going to be the 12th person in. And so essentially what they're trying to do is to offload that responsibility to some kind of objective, random reality.
Right.
And I think what I would argue is that over the course of time, we've gotten a lot better at understanding what discernment is, understanding through the mechanisms of the church what it is to do the will of God. Yeah, so it's...
Thank you.